welcome, and we are going to be recording this session just as we had the last session. We're recording now actually already, so I just want to let everybody know about that. And then just kind of reiterating some of the, I guess, rules from last time is we're going to go ahead and go through all the presentations. And if you have questions, you're welcome to put them in the chat, and I will be monitoring the chat this time around. And if we have time after the presentation itself, we'll go ahead and try to answer some of those, or we may just answer them along the way in the chat. But other questions, the majority of the questions will probably hold for the end of the class, and we'll try to address those at that time because we probably won't have too much time in between each of the presentations. Okay, I'm gonna go ahead and share my screen, make sure this is all working. Can everybody see my screen now? It says welcome back. Okay, great. Well, welcome back, everybody. I'm glad you joined us for class 2 of the virtual rain garden workshop series. I think we have a lot of people back, maybe not all, but that's okay. So I want to start just by introducing today's speakers, today's presenters. We have Rick Eilertson, and Rick is a civil and environmental engineer with more than 30 years of experience in municipal infrastructure, working in both the public and private sectors. His specialties include stormwater facility planning, design, inspection, and maintenance. Rick has received numerous awards over his tenure in municipal engineering, but his favorite is the 2013 National APWA Community Involvement Award. And this is Rick. Oh, I'm not sure if anybody can see can you see my mouse this time? No, of course not. Can you see my mouse now? Oh, good. Okay, I have 2 screens going. Now I know. So this is Rick in the corner here, in front of a rain garden sign. How fitting. And Rick, so if you remember, we asked all our presenters to let us know about their favorite native plant or a native plant they can kind of relate with. And if Rick was a native plant, he would be a shooting star. So this shooting star in particular came from Roger Bannerman. He was the one that we're dedicating this workshop to from his rain garden. So this is now in Rick's yard at his house, and it came from Roger's. So we thought that was pretty cool. Rick, did you want to share anything else about that?
No, I'm good.
Okay. Wasn't sure if there was more to the story. So Rick is going to be presenting today, and then also Maddie Dumas is a new presenter today that you haven't heard from yet. And Maddie is the Greenway Vegetation Coordinator for the City of Madison Engineering Division. Maddie works on the city's stormwater management system, a network of 1,600 plus acres of retention ponds and greenways. Maddie loves working to improve the quality and diversity of the native plantings on stormwater land with Emily and her motley crew of restoration interns, Operation Fresh Start youth crews, and volunteers. If Maddie were a plant, she'd be Ohio's spiderwort. Like spiderwort, which blooms for an extended period of time from late spring through midsummer, she has lots of energy and starts each day with a fresh face. Spiderwort flowers last just a day, but a single stem puts out one or a few new blossoms every day during flowering. So that's a pretty cool picture of Maddie here in the corner, and there's the Ohio spiderwort. And then I kept Teresa and Emily on here just because they're going to be joining us today too, so why not just share their friendly faces here too. I wanted to just give a little recap from class, not from class 2, but from class 1 during class 2. For those of you that did not join us, I know there were several that couldn't join us for the first class or just part of the first class. So I just wanted to share what we went over during that first class, just to kind of get you up to speed. So we just started with, besides intros, we started with the benefits of rain gardens and why we're even talking about rain gardens and trying to promote them. We also gave a quick intro to the Plant Day Native Plant Program. which is going on right now through Dane County. You can get native plants for a fraction of the cost. And I'll share more information about that again in class 3. We covered site selection, roof area measurements, and we demoed a couple of tools that you can use to actually measure your roof area that may drain into your rain garden. So we demoed using just Google Maps and measuring the roof area using Google Maps, and then also using DCI Map, which is a Dane County application. And all these resources are in the Google folder that we have, or Google folder that we have on Google Drive for this workshop. Then Emily covered our plants of the day. So Emily's going to be doing this for all 3 workshops. She's going to just give us a glimpse into some native plants, some good native plants for rain gardens. And then we also looked at some of the tools that we're using for this workshop, Padlet in particular. So for those of you that weren't at the first rain garden class, Padlet is the tool that we're using to submit, to kind of interact with you. So it's the tool that we're using to allow you to submit plans, to submit questions after each class, and also just, pictures of rain gardens or pictures of native plants that you might want to share with the group. This is really our way to interact with you. So you can post plans and other things, and then we can comment on those plans using Padlet. In addition to Padlet, again, we have the Rain Garden Resources folder, which is in the Google Drive. And you should have all received links to both of these. And then we had an assignment after each class, we will have an assignment. We had an assignment for class 1, obviously optional, but it was to take the information that you learned from class 1 and then create your own site plan. And then to wrap up class 1, Phil Gabler from the City of Madison provided a presentation on the Madison Green Infrastructure Study Area Reimbursement Program. There's an area on the near west side of Madison. It's a kind of a study, green infrastructure study area, and they are providing reimbursements for people who put in green infrastructure, rain gardens being one of them. So if you live on the near kind of the Westmoreland area, if you did not hear about the Green Infrastructure Study Area reimbursement and you're interested, you can watch the recording from class 1, and you can watch the whole recording from class 1. The link is on our both on Padlet and in our resources folder. I just wanted to thank those of you that actually submitted site plans. It was really fun to kind of go through them and dig a little deeper. So these are just some of the site plans we received. I apologize, I couldn't fit them all on here, and many more were submitted after I created this presentation. But that it's under column 1 in the Padlet. You can submit these site plans, and we will go ahead and review them and give you input and comments and feedback. So I will say we have not gotten, there's a few we still haven't gotten to that were submitted over the weekend. We'll get to those in the next couple of days and provide you feedback. There are also some that I had to ask follow-up questions on. Maybe I couldn't see something, or as we were reviewing them, there was a question that came up. So if please check back and take a look at Padlet and see if we commented on your post or on your site plan. And also if we had any questions, if you could get back to us on that, because we do want to make sure you get those questions answered. So please take a look at those. So I'm gonna leave it. Oh, I should not have done that. That was part of my wrap up. I should have made 2 presentations. I knew it. I knew I was gonna do that. Okay. Well, that is all that I have. I am going to pass it on to Teresa now, and she's going to start by going over some of the questions that came up as we were reviewing some of the site plans and some of the questions that were posted on Padlet, so that we can kind of review them with everybody.
All right, thanks, Crystal. I will get things kind of situated here so I can see what's going on.
Take your time. It's okay. For those of you that are not doing this, it's really hard with two screens and wanting to see all your faces on one, and then also making sure that you're actually presenting the right information and everything's kind of working. So
I was looking to see if I could get the chat up, but I guess you're gonna have to man that one.
I will man the chat. Yep.
All right. Well, what I'm going to be mainly talking about tonight is sort of the next step in your rain garden design, and that's the sizing of your rain garden. But first, we're going to talk a little bit about kind of the recap from last week and go over a few things that kind of came up when we were looking at some of the site plans that were submitted. So some of the things that I guess either we want to reiterate or just kind of comment on. One thing that I did talk about at the last workshop was that you want to make sure that you're not putting your rain garden in an area that receives a lot of drainage from other sites. So we kind of talked about those local neighborhood drainage patterns. A lot of times neighborhoods are designed so that water goes kind of through the backyards or through the side yards. So be mindful of how much water might be getting to your rain garden from other locations other than what you're kind of planning on. So that's one thing. Another thing is some people have some really great yards with a lot of really fun landscaping already, and so I think maybe you're having a hard time trying to figure out where your garden's going to go. One or more, I forget, kind of had an issue with trees and locations with proximity to trees. So I don't know if I mentioned last time, but you want to stay away from trees. One, because they their roots are, you don't want to dig through their roots. It's difficult even if you don't like the tree. But as long as the tree is healthy and is doing fine, trees are good for stormwater as well. They intercept a lot of runoff just by themselves, and so I wouldn't necessarily want to get rid of a tree in order to put in a rain garden. So something to consider there. Another couple had, kind of wondering if you could use the vegetable garden as a rain garden. And one, I think you want to be mindful of what might be washing off your roof and into something that, a vegetable garden that maybe you're going to, eat. There can be a lot of things that get deposited on a roof. There's the material that the roof is made out of. So that's one concern. And the other thing is rain gardens are designed to pond water for a short period of time while it infiltrates into the soil. And vegetable plants don't tend to like to be inundated, to have that water around them, and they tend to have pretty shallow roots, so they just can't handle that inundation either. So let's kind of skip the vegetable gardens for rain gardens there. And a couple other things. Some people had some locations that were pretty close to driveways, and Crystal will be the first to tell you that you don't want to put your rain garden right next to the driveway because you get out of your car, a lot of times you'll step, off the driveway, and if your rain garden's right there, you're stepping right into your rain garden. So just be mindful of how you use the space currently and how you might use it, and make sure you're not putting the rain garden someplace where you're going to be stepping on it all the time. And then the last thing is, we talk about you can put rain gardens in sunny places or shady places. I think you want to be careful about really shady places. There are some plants that will do all right in shady places, but I would also suggest that you look at the soils. If you have a really, kind of heavily deep shaded place, that those soils are going to be able to infiltrate, because you're not going to get the sun on those plants. And, the sun on the plants helps with evapotranspiration and evaporation. And without that, you might end up with a lot of water that's not really going anywhere. So those are a few things. Really enjoyed looking at all of your plans, and kind of looking forward to the next steps here. So kind of getting back into where we were last time. Like I said, you guys submitted the site plans. We looked at those. This was my site plan, and the location that I had determined for the rain garden was in front here. And really what we're going to talk about tonight is, how big. So we found a location that looks like it's going to work. It's not too close to the house, not too close to trees. We can get water there from a roof or some other impermeable surface. So at this point, it's still a potential location because we do still need to look at a couple things. And the one main thing is your soils. So that's something we're going to talk about tonight, and then a few other factors that are going to help you determine sort of the size of it. Really, with kind of the numbers we're going to give you, we're kind of shooting for a goal of capturing 90 to 100% of kind of your average annual rainfall. But really, a lot of this section can kind of boil down to really how much space do I have? A lot of times it comes down to that. You might want to make it bigger, but maybe you don't have the space. But what we're going to talk about tonight will kind of give you the calculations that if you do want to size it for that, 90 to 100% capture, you can. So let's get into things. So the factors that we're going to talk about tonight, I already mentioned soils and your soil properties. The drainage area that's draining to it, and that was something that you guys looked at last week or last workshop with measuring your roof area. And then some of it comes down to sort of level of effort. How much digging do you really want to do? That's also a very important thing. So, but like I said before, a lot of it is site constraints. Not everybody's got a big yard, not everybody's got a yard with a lot of space. So we deal with what we have. So, and every little bit is better than what's there now. If we can even get a little bit of water in the ground, that's going to be an improvement. So we're going to look at a couple things for determining what kind of soil you have in the area that you're interested in putting your rain garden. And one of the things that you can do to figure that out is to do an infiltration test. And the other thing is to do a soil ribbon test. And we're going to talk about how both of those can be done right here. So with an infiltration test, it really isn't any more than digging a hole in the ground and filling it up with water and kind of measuring how long it takes that water to drain down through that hole. So you're going to want to dig the hole about 6 to 12 inches deep, however wide you want to make it, usually about as wide as your shovel. You're going to fill the hole with water and let it stand for an hour. And then you're gonna, this kind of just sort of pre-wets the soil. It kind of starts getting things moving. So let some water get in there, let it sit for a little bit. Then you're gonna fill the hole with water again, and you're gonna measure, the depth of the water when you start. So that would be your D1. And then you're going to wait an hour, and then you're gonna measure the depth that the water is at after that 1 hour. And that's going to give you subtract your D1 from your D2, and that's going to give you your infiltration rate. So that's the number of inches that infiltrated in 1 hour. Pretty straightforward. This is going to kind of give you a little bit of an overestimation of your infiltration rate in that not only can the water move down through the soil, but it can also kind of move to the side. And when you dig your rain garden, you don't have as much side as you have down. So this test kind of gives you an overestimation, but it is useful, and we'll show you how you use it for sizing in a little bit. So the next thing you can do to look at what kind of soils you have in your yard is called a soil ribbon test. And if we were, in the same room, I like to bring some like modeling clay that my kids play with sometimes, though not so much anymore. They're getting a little old for playing with that. But and it's kind of nice to be able to demonstrate it, but I do have some pictures here. So what you're going to do is you're going to collect a handful of soil from about 4 to 6 inches beneath your soil surface. You don't want to take it from right up on top, because that tends to be kind of your topsoil layer, and really where you're going to be digging that out most likely when you create your rain garden. So you want to kind of get beneath that top layer. And then you're going to add some water to it until it kind of feels like putty, like not sopping wet. You can kind of squeeze it, and if a little bit of water comes out, that's all right, but you want to get it kind of wet. Then you're going to squeeze it into a ball, and then kind of let it go in your hand. And if it doesn't remain in a ball, then you probably have a sandy soil. You can kind of, give it a little toss. If it comes back into your hand and it just kind of goes everywhere, it's probably pretty sandy. If it does remain in a ball in your hand, then you want to start pushing out that soil between, your thumb and your finger, kind of into kind of a ribbon, as you can see in this picture, until it breaks off. And you might want to do this a couple times just to sort of see kind of how long it goes until it breaks. So if that ribbon is really only about 1 inch long, you probably have more silty soil. If it's 1 to 2 inches long before it breaks, you probably have a clayey soil. If it's greater than 2 inches, you have a very clayey soil, and it might not be a really great place for a rain garden, because if you have that much clay in your soil, it's going to be, it's not going to infiltrate very easily. It's going to take a long time for that water to move through that soil. And the reason that we do rain gardens is to get water to move into the soil. So if it's really, really clay, you might want to see if there's another spot in your yard that might work, or just do some native planting. That would also be a good option. So the next thing we want to look at is how much area is draining to your rain garden. And this is something that Crystal demonstrated during the last workshop for ways that you can measure that using some of the online tools. If you don't, if those don't really work out for you, you can always go outside with a tape measure and you'll measure kind of along the ground where your roof is and get the measurements that way as well. So in my case, I was looking at about 900 square feet, that portion of my roof that was draining to the downspout that went to the area that I wanted to put the rain garden. We're going to use that area along with our soil information. And then the other thing that we want to look at is kind of this level of effort. How much digging do you want to do? And it's kind of related to the slope of your yard. And we talked about a little bit about the slope during the last workshop. One of the layers on the DCI mapping tool has slope. It's not super detailed, but it kind of gives you an idea of what that is, and we'll talk about some other ways you can look at slope. Basically the slope is kind of going to give you an idea of how deep you want to make that rain garden. The steeper the slope, the easier it's going to be to have a deeper rain garden, whereas you have a really shallow slope. You might not want a really deep rain garden because it's going to, you're going to have your soil out of balance. So you need to dig to get a flat bottom, and then you need to pile to get a berm. And I'll give you some examples of kind of what that looks like based on the slope. Sometimes it's not super easy to understand just by explanation. So here is one image that shows the top one has kind of your slope, and then the middle one shows that when you dig your rain garden you want to have that flat bottom. And then the third image at the bottom shows the berm that you need to put at the downstream side in order to hold the water in. And what you really would like is to have the amount of soil that you're digging out to be fairly equal to the amount of soil you need for that berm. And so when you have a shallow slope, you get a better balance by having not a very deep rain garden. And if you have a steeper slope, you get a better balance by having a little bit deeper. And this next one shows it a little bit. So this is a 4% slope. Can you see my my mouse? Okay, I had to use it on the right screen. You have a 4% slope, so a fairly flat yard. And if we were going to do a 5-inch deep rain garden, we would dig it down so that we have a depth of 5 inches, and we would pile over on the end for our berm to be able to have that 5-inch ponding water depth. So you can see here that the area in yellow is larger than our area in red. So you can imagine if we dug this even deeper, we would have even more soil that we'd be digging out, but we still wouldn't need any more to pile at the bottom for our berm. Now, if we look at a steeper slope, so this is a 12% slope. If we were going to do, again, a 5-inch rain garden, in this case, we're digging not very much, but we have a lot that we would need in order to create that berm. So in this case, it would make sense to have a deeper rain garden, and then you would have a better balance between the amount that you have to dig out and the amount that you need to create the berm at the bottom. And Rick is going to be talking about construction of the rain garden today, and I'm sure he'll talk a little bit more about kind of that process as well. All right, so with the slope, and these are recommendations that are given in the rain garden manual. So if you have less than a 4% slope, recommended 3 to 5 inch depth of the rain garden. Again, it's a way to kind of balance that amount that you're digging versus what you'll need in the berm. If you have a 5 to 7% slope, 6 to 7 inches is a recommended depth. And if you have an 8 to 12% slope, then 8 inches is the recommended depth. Really, between 3 and 8 inches is generally what we look at for rain gardens. And if you have greater than 12% slope, it might be pretty difficult to dig to get that flat bottom. You'd be moving a lot of soil and having to berm up a lot. So probably better to choose another location, or this might be a case where you may need to hire a landscaper or somebody to kind of help you out with that steep slope. So I said we would look at a couple other ways to do the slope, and another way that you can use the mapping tool to look at your slope is to measure the distance between 2 of the contour lines. So there's a contour layer, and if you turn that on and you zoom in, you'll see these orange lines, and those are 1 foot contours. So the elevation at this line is all the same around here, and then the elevation at the next one is a next step down. So it might be 879 and 878. So there's 1 foot of elevation change between those 2 lines. So if I measure that, I can, in this case, it was 12 feet. I can get my slope from that, and I'm trying to remember if I put that calculation on there. Yes, I think I did. So you have a 1 foot change in elevation over 12 feet of distance. So you have 1 divided by 12 times 100%. And I actually have about an 8% slope on my yard. Another way you can do that is you can, the rain garden manual shows how you can use a line level out in your yard. You know, if the snow is melted yet, you could go out and do that, or wait until the snow melts, and you could measure it out actually on your yard too. That's going to be probably your most accurate measurement. But as long as, I mean, these are guidelines. So, you know, if you don't get something exact, it's not a big deal. Oh yeah, 8%. Oh yes, this is the image from the rain garden manual that tells you how to do the measurement in your yard. So we've looked at soils, we've looked at how much area is draining to our land or our rain garden, and we kind of thought about how deep we want it. Now we look at kind of what size, and the things that are going to kind of determine the size based on sort of a percentage of the area that's draining to it is, it comes down to mostly your soil type. So if you have a sandy soil and you have at least 1 inch per hour of with your infiltration rate, then your sizing factor is going to be 10%. So 10% of your roof area you'll want to have as the area of the bottom of your rain garden. If you have a silty soil and you have infiltration rates of at least 0.4 to 1, then you'll be looking at 20%. And if you have a clayey soil, then and infiltration rates probably less than in ½ inch per hour, then you'll be looking at 30%. So we use that sizing factor with our drainage area in order to get the design area for the pond and bottom of your rain garden. And so one way to kind of think about that, really with sandy soils, you can get away with a smaller rain garden than if you had a clayey soil. So if we had this area, get my mouse on the right screen, the roof draining to the rain garden, we'd have, if we had sandy soil, we'd have a 10%, this area is 10% of the yellow area. And if we had silty soil, we'd have 20% of the yellow area. And if we had clay soil, we'd have our rain garden bottom be about 30% of the size of our roof draining to it. So we'll just walk through an example calculation here. And so for mine, we had a drainage area of 900 square feet, and I had a silty soil type. And my sizing factor then was 20%, or for multiplying, we're going to use 0.2. So how big? So 900 times 0.2 equals 180 square feet. So that's going to be the size of the bottom of my rain garden. And I've kind of determined that I probably wanted about 10 feet wide. So then what does the length need to be 180 square feet? We have 180 divided by 10, which is the width, and that gives us a length of 18 feet. So that's going to be the size of my rain garden right here, which you can already see from the aerial photo that the rain garden is there. And that's approximately the size. It might have ended up being just a little bit smaller. But some things to think about when you're kind of planning for the size. So that's just the size of the bottom of the rain garden. You will have to have room for kind of the transition between your lawn or your yard and the bottom of the rain garden. So you'll have to dig down, and that's going to take up some space, and then also some space for the berm at the bottom. Transition slope and the berm, yep. And so here we're looking at kind of just another cross-sectional view of a rain garden. The green area, that's going to be your flat bottom. That's the area that we calculated. And then, like I said, that transition zone is going to be those side slopes. So you do need to leave some space for those. And also, it's not a bad idea to have just a little bit of a buffer around it too. There's nothing that says that your garden can only be as big as where you dig. It can go beyond that as well. So like I said, 18 by 10 approximately. And that again is the flat bottom. So to kind of wrap things up, it really does come down to kind of a reality check. You know, do you have a small yard? Do you have a big yard? Do you have a lot of other things kind of going on? Do you have a lot of other constraints? How much digging do you want to do? A lot of times, you know, you want to make it a certain size, but remember you have to do the work as well. And then you also fill it with plants. So cost can be a consideration as well when you think about that. And, you know, really do what you can, and it will be good. So I think we're probably doing good on time and probably need to move on. I don't know, Crystal, was there anything you wanted to bring up from the chat right away?
No, I think actually Rick has done a really good job answering a lot of these questions already. So I think we're okay on the chat, and I'll kind of keep an eye on that and make sure that we address those later on. But we probably do need to keep moving ahead. So thanks, Teresa.
All right.
Rick, I believe you are up next, and Rick is going to talk to us about construction.
Okay, let me just see if I can share my screen. Let me know when you can see my screen. Should be a picture of a backhoe with a young boy in it.
It's up. Awesome.
So I'll be talking about constructing your rain garden. This is actually my house. This is not a rain garden location. We had a sanitary sewer issue, and so a contractor come in, and Evan helped with a little bit of the digging. So what we'll be talking about is, I guess, key considerations for your site is to look at where the water is coming from. And you know, in general, most of the situations are going to be, we're anticipating that you're looking at roof runoff and putting a rain garden right on your own property. However, there may be things like street terrace rain gardens that you want to be considering. It may have some consideration for something other than roof runoff that you're designing the rain garden for. You also want to keep in mind where the water is going currently and where it's going to go after you construct a rain garden. We don't want to make problems worse anywhere downstream. So generally, the whole intent of the rain garden is to try to make things better. And actually, you know what? I'm gonna. So another consideration is what's underground. We're going to talk about utilities. We're going to talk about soils and some other items, things that we can do to improve what's underground. Some goals that we want to consider as you're designing and building your rain garden is how much water you want to capture. Do you want to really maximize the amount of water that you're capturing and then getting to soak into the ground, or do you want to just make it incrementally better than what it is right now? Another consideration is, what do you want your rain garden to look like? That'll have a bearing on how you want to design it so that it's functioning to your expectations. And then some other considerations are, what are you going to have around the rain garden? Is it all, do you have all currently turf grass and you want to just have all turf grass around the rain garden? There's some great suggestions about having vegetable gardens. I think there may be appropriate locations around the perimeter of a rain garden that you could consider vegetables and or certainly like fruit trees and things like that. I would be concerned about putting them in the middle of a rain garden. We can talk more about that if there's time, either later today or the next session. Are you going to? Is there pavement around the rain garden? And then native vegetation. Again, I think we would probably, all the presenters would recommend, as much as you can, look at native vegetation because there's a lot of co-benefits of that. So first of all, we're going to talk about where the water's coming from and where it's going. This is a site that I got involved with pretty early on. For 10 years, I was the environmental engineer for the city of Fitchburg. This site actually has a wetland right next to it that's on private property. The property in the foreground is actually a property owned now by the city of Fitchburg, and the city put in Apache Pond on that site. When I was looking at this adjacent property, the Dunn's View condos, I realized they put in a rain garden in here, and I noticed it was always dry. They do have some downspouts that are connected to the rain garden, but I never saw water in the rain garden. Initially, I thought it was just functioning super well. What I realized is, and you can't see it very well in the photo here. I don't know if you can see my mouse, but this has this property was designed by an architect. I mean, the architect was the developer. I don't know if he did this intentionally or if it was just completely unintentional. The roof slopes to the north, away from the rain garden. So there's maybe I don't know, a couple hundred square feet of roof that actually drains to the downspouts, and in the rain garden, you know, several thousand feet of square feet drains to the north on the pavement, and then drain across out into the wetland without any treatment whatsoever. When we put the Apache pond in, we actually were able to dig a hole down to sand and then fill that with sand that we got from the construction of the Apache pond, and made a berm with the tighter soils, and then actually planted the rain garden. So actually that then, you know, on city property, we're able to accommodate what was supposed to be performed on the private property. And actually had a really good relationship with the then owners of several of the units of the Dunsview condos, and they were very much involved in that. But it was it was an interesting process where the design of the whole reason there was a rain garden here was because of the developer actually built in the wetland and filled in the wetland, and so it was just kind of an interesting little project. Let's talk about what's underground. And if anybody's heard of Ghostbusters, didn't quite work the way I wanted. But anyway, who are you going to call? And write in the chat, who are you going to call when you're trying to figure out what utilities you have? Okay, 811. Can everybody remember that? 811. And we'll talk a little bit about utilities. So this is one of the rain gardens that I'll be talking about. This is in front of the Fitchburg Community Center. We call it the Fitchburg Community Rain Garden. So before we did any digging, we called in Diggers Hotline. And I was a little bit, initially I thought that any utilities would likely be in the street terrace between the sidewalk and the curb and gutter road. We actually had quite a bit of utilities on the rain garden side. So previously this was just an old ditch, or basically a swale that drained from, there's a curb cut in the driveway entrance. So there's runoff that came from several driveways upstream to the east on Lacey Road, and then drained to this area drain. So it's like a 3-foot diameter area drain, just with a Nina grate on it. So just drained down the swale, and it had been a site that I was really interested in trying to identify whether we could do some enhancements and actually get some stormwater treatment with a rain garden. It had some trees on it. One was a dead tree that was right in the middle of where I wanted to put the rain garden, so that was an easy decision to remove it since it was already dead. Then it had 2 swamp white oaks, and we strategically located the perimeter of the berm so that we could still have the swamp white oaks, kind of in with the design of the rain garden, but not necessarily right in the smack dab in the middle. And it ended up working out fairly well. But anyway, with the utilities, generally orange is the telecommunications, red is typically electric, yellow is typically gas, natural gas. So there's a couple of different things to keep in mind, but you want to make sure you, probably even before you start laying out your rain garden, you understand any utilities. On private residential properties, you also might have things like invisible fences. Now, typically a utility is not going to locate that when you call it 811. Hopefully you'd know where that is. I guess if it was put in by a previous property owner, or you just didn't remember that you installed it, it's a pretty easy fix if you wanted to keep it, or you just put another one in. So we're talking about what's underground now, and that's understanding the soils. One of the things, and you can do this even if you're not putting a rain garden, I'd recommend getting a soil probe. You can pick these up at UW, basically local UW extension offices. Crystal did mention that right now, there's, because of the pandemic, the Dane County W Extension office they don't have staff to make these available, but hopefully soon they will be. And you can also check the local hardware stores and try to come up with something. But basically, this is Evan pushing the soil probe into the ground, and then you pull that out, and then just take a look at what the soils are. Actually, we were aerating our lawn with the soil probe that we got for free. But then you can take the soil samples too. And if it's, for example, if you're trying to understand what soil types your lawn is, you can have those taken to the UW lab and then get a soil analysis done. So continuing on with what's underground, and Teresa already talked about this pretty well, and I'll just elaborate a little bit more. That roll test or the ribbon test to get an idea of, again, you look at this, and this is probably at least 5 inches that the roll test has gotten without breaking. So that means that you're basically in this 2-inch plus clay. These are slightly different infiltration rates that Teresa had, but kind of the same general idea. So in these two lower areas, the silts and the clays, generally not going to be preferable by themselves, but you can do it that. I mean, you can build a rain garden in there. What you want to consider is amending the soil. So if you have the ability to take that material out, take it out. If you can't, or if it's not feasible to do that, you can potentially amend in compost or sand and then improve that infiltration rate. But again, if there's any ability to take that out at all, I'd recommend taking it out. This is one of the holes that Adrian here, through the AmeriCorps volunteers, was able to dig beforehand. So we did several test pits around the site before we finalized the design and determined whether it would make sense. We found it was really kind of interesting. Farther upstream, we had really nice sandy soil. Like this one right here was really nice after, it was about 2 feet of topsoil material. And then we got down to a really nice sand gravel material on the upstream side. On the downstream side, basically around the release structure, the outfall structure, it got to be a lot clayer. Anyway, it's good to understand what the soils are. You can get, just from the soil textural class, you can get an idea of what the infiltration rate is. The best idea is to do what these kids are doing at the Leopold School Rain Garden, which is another cool project that I was involved with. And we've got a couple of slides on that. Basically just take a coffee can, cut out the bottom, fill it with 2 inches of water, and then time how long it takes for that water to drain out. And then you can calculate what that is in inches per hour. If it doesn't drain it out at all, you know that you've got some pretty clayey soils. Drains out within a minute, you got very, very porous soils. This is actually at the Leopold Rain Garden back in 2010, where we had an opportunity to work with several science classes from kindergarten through 5th grade, and just talk about, learn about rain gardens. And then they actually converted a dry detention basin that was in the front yard of the Leopold School to a rain garden after several classes. But basically, if you have 20 kids, you can have them all just hold the line and get an idea of what the perimeter of your rain garden is. If you don't have that, you can just take the line, set it down on the ground. You do want to consider getting some lath and then staking it, and then actually getting, making the string, pulling the string taut using a level line or line level that I should show an example on the next page. But basically just laying out a level site from basically where water's coming into your proposed rain garden, and then you want to have your berm be basically that same height all the way around the perimeter. So this is this is actually this is a photo of doing an archaeological dig, but maybe they had rain gardens back in prehistory. Basically, again, using a line level like she's using right here, and then just putting stakes, and you can either just tie the string around several stakes. I mean, that's what I would probably do. Like here, we've got the stakes at the perimeter, and then here I actually had a surveying instrument, and then I just measured this, put a crow's foot, or basically a line that represented a level line all the way around the perimeter. Here I wanted the height of the berm to be 8 inches above the release, and then I had the release about 6 inches above the bottom. So, I didn't have, there's never more than, or there's rarely more than like 6 inches of standing water in this community center rain garden. Again, this is what the line level looks like. This is actually one of the earlier rain gardens. This is Roger Bannerman's front yard rain garden. And I don't know the exact date, but it was in the late 90s or early 2000s that Roger put this one in. And again, we're obviously dedicating this workshop series in Roger's name. Roger passed away this past fall. And sorry, Roger is a key person in promoting rain gardens around Wisconsin, and even the entire United States. So this is some of Roger's friends and contractors building his rear rain garden in the upper portion. So you want to consider if you've got turf, which Roger had in this case, he's got a sod cutter. So take the sod, cut the sod out, remove that, and you can reuse that sod elsewhere. And then they actually came in, and I might have some other photos of that, but till up the soil. Obviously need to get the depression in there. Here's a nice exhibit that comes from the rain garden manual that's in the rain garden resources that Crystal provided. So make sure you're 10 feet away, like Teresa talked about earlier, before you even start the perimeter of your rain garden. And then generally, you want to be, obviously want to be on your own property unless you have permission from the city or village or town that you live in to have a street terrace rain garden. So again, you want to keep in mind where the water is coming from. In this case, obviously, downspouts. Make sure you're directing the water from the downspout towards your rain garden, and then look at the release. So you can make the berm entirely flat all the way around, and then water is going to uniformly drain across that. But there may be situations where you actually want to define that release. And make that your overflow route. So this is some excavating of the Fitchburg Community Rain Garden. It was really great because we had, since I worked for the Public Works Department, had access to a lot of cool equipment and staff to be able to help with the project, as opposed to just digging it myself. So anyway, we peeled off about 2 feet of, anywhere from a foot to 2 feet of topsoil, and we were able to utilize the topsoil on other projects that the city was doing, and excavated out. We had Second Season Recycling, which is now Purple Cow Organics. Actually was in the process of changing their range trails facility in Verona. So we got a very good rate on engineered soil. So they actually mixed in the sand for us along with the compost. If you've got access to engineered soil, which is basically just sand and compost, generally about a 75% sand ratio to 25% compost is typical, or in that general range. We also had Silt Sock of Southern Wisconsin donate silt sock just for perimeter erosion control, and kind of have an interesting application later on that I'll talk about in a couple of other slides. Getting plants for the rain garden, I call this the stone soup approach. So basically put the word out that we were doing this project. Obviously we had some funding from city staff, the AmeriCorps volunteers donated a lot of their time and labor, helping me lay out and design the rain garden. And then folks like Roger got back to me and said, "Hey, this is Adrian actually digging in that front rain garden. So this is 2009, and by that time, Roger was interested in changing the plants that he had in the rain garden. So he was going to just this contractor was going to just either dig these out or just spray them and then till them under. But we actually, Roger actually let us dig them out and then use them in the Fitchburg Community Rain Garden, which was a really cool project. This is one of my coworkers, Holly, who's actually on the call today, that was learning from Roger. Roger loved to talk and teach. And anytime he had a willing listener, he would talk for hours. All my 5-minute conversations with Roger typically took an hour or so. One of the cool things about the Leopold Rain Garden project was we actually started with the kids, gave them bags, and then took them through the Promega bioswale just down from City Hall in Fitchburg. And each had them form into groups and then told them which plant species we wanted them to gather seed from. So we actually, the Leopold School project, we actually basically kind of laid out, did the rain garden design from the beginning. And then the kids actually stratified the seeds, sorted the seeds, and then planted them, and then worked on those are the plants that they put in. This is Brittany planting in the Fitchburg Community Rain Garden. So fine grading your rain garden. But we had, because there was several feet of drop, we had to make several berms. So we've actually made this into 3 different cells and just utilized the engineered soil for the berms. And we'll talk about that a little bit later on. We had silt sock for just erosion control at the front end here. And I'm gonna just keep zooming along, I think. But this is the downstream berm. Again, water could go, once it got up high enough, it would go in the release structure. And then this downstream berm was about 8 inches higher than the outlet structure. Here, I didn't put a defined release because there wasn't, when I looked downstream, there wasn't anything that I was worried about for flow got, I didn't really want to have a defined erosive area. So, I figured having it stream uniformly across was what I preferred here. There may be other situations where you actually want to dig a special location and have that maybe be anywhere from 6 inches to 12 inches lower, depending on how much flow is going through it. Because I had a lot of capacity with this release structure. So this is us digging or basically planting the plants with a planting party. We had a lot of Girl Scouts that helped us and then various community volunteers. It is pretty important. Karen Armour actually worked, I think at that time, with EC3 and really knew her plants much better than I even. And then Diane Streck is helping her just go through and identify different plants, because the plants that were in Roger's rain garden weren't, they didn't still have labels on them, and he had a lot of different species. And obviously there's a reason that Roger has just decided that he wanted to change the species. But we were able to kind of sort out and place the plants that were best, the plants that like wetter environments in the middle of the cells, where we allowed the water to be deeper. And then the ones that like drier conditions, like the Echinacea here. This is actually on the berm, one of the middle intermediate berms. Looked at ways to kind of keep it wet while the plants are getting established. So here we actually put a meter on the hydrant because it was just closer than the spigot from the community center. So of course, the day after we had the planting party, or maybe a couple of days after, we had a huge, like a 2-inch rainfall. It ended up washing out portions of the site. So this is going into the rain garden from the curb cut. So this is Holly helping me basically regrade. And because the portions of the berm washed out, we had this silt sock and we no longer needed it for erosion control. So we actually incorporated the silt sock into the berm, and that actually worked out super well. Anyway, when if you have more questions about making a berm out of something like this, let me know. But we did use a 4-foot level in this case, just to make sure that it's as flat as possible, just to reduce the erosive velocity. Another project that I was involved with, we had plants left over. There's so many plants that we were able to gather from Rogers Rain Garden. A number of those are in Baraboo. I live in Baraboo, and I'm on the Kiwanis, and so we had the city actually made a bioretention device. So it's a large bioretention device. You can't see it real well, but there's an end wall. So when water gets up, I guess the initial flush sends water to a rain garden, and then there's actually a underground pipe, an underdrain that with the sand around it that allows that water, after it gets filtered, to go back into the storm system. So it's kind of a first flush, they needed plants, so we had a planting party with the Kiwanis, and this is just the rain garden in action after a good heavy rainfall. The volunteers, and then my older son, who wasn't quite happy, he was more interested in baseball than rain gardens at the time, but it's kind of fun anyway. How am I doing on time, Crystal?
You're about 5 minutes over, so we should probably wrap this up in a couple of minutes. Thanks.
So another site that I won't have, I'll just blitz through quickly, but the Fitchburg Recycling drop-off site rain garden is obviously this is much larger than what you would do in a residential property. And we had 6 feet of clay when we dug the test pit, and ended up being about 10 feet of clay around that we dug out in some areas. We filled it with about 4 feet of 3-inch stone, and then 3 feet of 1-inch stone, and then topped it off with engineered soil. It was really kind of interesting just seeing even with doing all of that, it still held water at different times. After we modified the release structure a little bit just to minimize the amount of depth of water, then it was functioning much better. I'll talk a little bit about this during the maintenance, because you can see, I don't know if anybody can see this plant right here, but this is purple loosestrife, and it came in. We did not plant that there, but it was something that we ended up needing to deal with. And I'll talk real quickly about some of the terrace rain gardens. This is some of the first terrace rain gardens that Madison put in. So if you want to do this, one of the things that I think Madison's designs now, they're not quite as steep because they're somewhat of a safety concern. When the plants all grow in, it looks like it's all level, but there is a chance to fall in, and there's a little bit of a safety hazard. But so something to keep in mind if you decide to put a terrace rain garden in, look at that. So that's what I've got.
Thank you, Rick. I think right now we're going to pass on questions, and I'm kind of keeping track on all the questions in the chat, but I believe most of them have been answered. And if anybody has any questions for Rick, we should have a few minutes at the end for additional questions. So at this,
go ahead. I'm sorry. Send an email to me too. Sorry.
No, that's okay. Thanks, Rick, and thanks, Teresa. So at this time, I think we're going to take a quick break. It was scheduled to be a 5-minute break, but we might make it a 3-minute break if everybody's okay with that. Hopefully everybody got some food earlier. And I'm going to put up a poll question since we were talking about soils. We're just interested in knowing, can everybody see the poll question now? Okay. Just interested in finding out if you know about your soils and what type of soils you have, and it's okay if you don't. That's fine too. That's why you do some of these drainage tests before you actually build your rain garden, to determine, what is the drainage in the area where I want to build my rain garden. Do I have good drainage? Do I have poor drainage? And that'll help us actually design the rain garden. So I am going to leave this up, and we're going to come back. It's 7:08 on my clock right now. We're going to come back and start again at about 7:11. Thanks, everybody.
All right, can everyone see that?
We can.
Awesome. All right, now that we've thought about the real primary purpose of our rain garden, we can start to get into some of the fun stuff. Rain gardens can have multiple purposes, of course. They can also be aesthetic. They can serve as wildlife habitat. And, you know, in order to get at some of those secondary purposes and functions, we want to really think about design. It really can't be stressed enough that one of the most important considerations for your rain garden is location. I know Rick and Teresa have talked about this, but from a design perspective, a couple things you may not have thought about are solar exposure and future solar exposure. You may know what your yard looks like right now, but maybe, you know, you planted a tree and it grows really fast, or you've got that fast growing shrub right at the corner of the yard. Maybe you know your neighbor is going to install a fence and that's going to change the shading that you have, or there's a condo going up across the street. So, you know, to the extent that you are able to, you'll want to think about things like that. And of course, that will change the plants that you are able to use and where you want to put your garden. The view from your home, you know, you'll want to think about, is it going to really drive you crazy if that garden isn't centered out your front window later on? Are you going to regret that you kind of offset it? What about other uses of your yard? So, you know, maybe it will be a pain if you put your rain garden where it seems to make a lot of sense, but you have to walk around it every time you get to the mailbox. Or maybe you want to place it so that it's hiding that, you know, hose reel in the front of your house. Or maybe you'd like some screening around your patio and you can, you know, plant some tall rain garden plants to help provide that. And then too, you want to think about what it's going to look like from the sidewalk, from the street, from the sidewalk across the street, maybe from down the block. Think about what the sight lines are going to be all around your house. To that end, it makes a lot of sense to, you know, place a string out in your yard or put some spray paint down in the shape that you think you want your rain garden to be and the location you think you want it to be, and just kind of live with it for a couple of days and see what you think about that. Other considerations, you know, as you're planting close to public borders, you want to think about, you know, if you're going to put tall plants right next to the sidewalk, are they going to flop over into the sidewalk and cause hazards or obstruct views? And also, as Rick mentioned, you know, even if you're not doing a terrace rain garden, if you're digging a rain garden right next to the sidewalk, like this image on the right here, is that kind of a hazard for someone stepping aside to let, you know, someone with their dog walk by? Is someone going to fall into your rain garden? Think about where you want to put it for safety too. You know, we design, of course, not just for function, but also so that things look nice. And one thing we really want to think about with design is intentionality. So sending a message to others that this garden is intentional, and maybe you really like the wild look that some native plants can give you, and that's great. But it benefits everybody to show that this is part of your yard. And there are lots of ways you can do that, subtle or not so subtle. And I think this image here is a really good example of a not so subtle, very intentional. I'm a garden. This garden is screaming, I'm a garden and I'm supposed to be here. You know, it's got things like edging, plastic edging. It's got a border of stone. It's got the sculpture in the middle. All those are things that you can do to send a signal that this was intentional. We did this on purpose. You know, more subtle things you could do. You could mulch and you could remulch every year. If you like that look. You could strategically place boulders, bird baths, sculptures, things like that. I like that this is pretty understated, the image on the left. They just put a bench there. You know that garden's supposed to be there, so you can sit on the bench and just enjoy the view. On the right, we have a really manicured looking rain garden. The big boulders are a giveaway that this was intentional. The nice tree that they've got there, or a shrub. And then one thing that they did, you know, I would sort of discourage this, although it can look very nice, is they use just one plant in the basin of their garden. it looks very unique, although there's some disadvantages in terms of providing wildlife habitat. All right, so another major consideration is shape. You'll often see rain gardens in the bean shape, and there's a lot of good reasons for that. You know, first, it's naturalistic. When it fills in, it really looks like, you know, a native garden or a really nice curved shape, kind of ties in your yard, provides a little bit of extra screening. You know, every yard is going to have some slope away from the house, and a bean shape can really suit a slope nicely. And then a bean shape has one wider edge and one shorter edge. And if you position it so that the wider edge is, you know, directly towards where the outflow of your water is, you're going to be able to take up more water and kind of cup that water. So in big rain events, it doesn't spill around the edges. Round rain gardens are also nice. You can get really nice symmetry. You could put tall things like one shrub or really nice tall plants in the middle. And a rectangular rain garden is going to give you, you know, a more formal look again, but it has some of the advantages of the bean shape, and that you're going to get that wider edge that you can position to take up water. Really, you can make your rain garden any shape that you want. You can do it irregular if you want. You just want to be aware of, you know, the more concave edges you have, the harder it's going to be to make that rain basin flat, which is what you really need. Topography. Now, Teresa talked about the actual topography of your yard, and you can certainly adapt your rain garden to that shape of, or so that your rain garden adapts to the shape of your topography. This is a rain garden that we helped construct at Mendota Elementary School on Madison's north side. And initially we intended to just do a simple bean shape, but as we got on site and we kind of started looking at where the water was flowing and what the sight lines would be, we decided to do this sort of bottleneck up that steeper part of the slope, and it ended up looking really nice, and it kind of provided some screening from, you know, upslope there's a school learning garden, and so students can sit in that school learning garden, and when they look out, instead of seeing the parking lot right away, they have a nice curved sheltered view of that rain garden first. So you can think about things like that. And then, of course, there's choose your own adventure. You can create your own micro topography, and of course, berms are something we've talked a fair amount about. It's a great way to use up that soil that you're digging out, and you can place it just on the downslope edge. You can do as this person on the left here did. You can make it sort of volcano style all around the edges, or you could do something a little more creative. You could do sort of islands or a berm that's interior, as Rick was kind of explaining, and that would give you the advantage of allowing different plants in the interior. So, you know, some plants only like wet, some plants like dry, but you could have some really interesting planting patterns if you decided to create these islands of refuge for the dry loving plants. All right, another major consideration are your inlets and your outlets. You know, you want your water to go into your rain garden, and depending on where you place your rain garden, you may want to help that along. You know, no matter where you decide to put your rain garden, you're going to want to make sure that your downspout is angled towards the rain garden. If you think that it's not going to be able to get to your rain garden, you might consider doing a downspout extension. I love this rain garden on the right. It's the world's tiniest rain garden for the world's tiniest yard, but they got there. They directed the water directly from the downspout into the garden, and you know what? As small as it is, that is taking up rainwater. It's doing a good job. So if you'd like something a little less obtrusive, something you don't have to worry about when you're mowing quite as much, you can use riprap or pavers or stone, and that can give you you know, just a different element to your yard. It can look really nice. Both of these two yards, they decided to use mulch around the stone, which I think is a good idea, just to provide, you know, you're not gonna have to mow right up to it, so you don't have to worry about rocks getting stuck on your mower and things like that. And it just adds a different fun element of planting to your yard. If you would like to be able to continue mowing, you don't want to deal with your inlet, you know, taking up so much of your yard, you can actually bury your downspout. On the left here, we've got an example of a yard where the resident buried the downspout. It's about a 4-inch pipe that just goes directly into the rain garden from that downspout in the side of the house there. And then he just placed the sod back over the top and it eventually filled in. And that's kind of a nice option if you maybe don't have as much space in your yard. You can also kind of leave it as is, the rain garden on the right, you can see they do have a little bit of a downspout extender, but as long as you're directing your water as much as you can towards your rain garden, it can just be a grass inlet. You don't have to do anything fancy if you don't want to. Edging, here's that image from the first slide again. This rain garden on the right is really nice because they laid out bricks. It's very formal looking. This person on the left did something interesting with some stones there. And you can certainly do something like that. Plastic edging can also kind of tie it off. Teresa mentioned you can do a buffer between your rain garden and the rest of your yard or whatever else you've got going on. And that is a really good idea to kind of taper things off. I think that, where is it? The more formal rain garden, this one here has a little bit of everything going on. They've got the plastic edging and then they've got stone and then they've got more plastic edging just for a more formal look. So that's something you could do. One thing to consider if you're worried about critters, if that's a big problem, you've noticed that rabbits just eat up everything you plant, like in my yard, you could consider fencing. It could just be a temporary fence like this one, or you could do something a little more permanent if you like. We'll get a lot more into this when we talk about plants, but you'll want to think about how much screening you're expecting from your rain garden. It could be a great way to provide screening for most of the year, but not all of the year. There was some discussion about cup plants on Padlet, I noticed. Cup plants are great. They're super easy to grow. They grow super tall. They have big branching leaves, so they can really provide a lot of screening. But one downside to some of these taller plants, especially if you don't plan your design all that well with support, is that some of them tend to get the flop. So on the right hand side, we've got a sawtooth sunflower, and it's flopping because it's right next to a very short area of prairie, but it's just an example of what can happen if you plant really tall stuff in the center and then really short stuff on the edge and you don't have anything transitional so that they can kind of provide support. This is a contrasting image here. On the left, we have a very, very tall rain garden. It's right next to a street. The tall purple flowers are Joe Pye weed. There's some sawtooth sunflower in there. You can't tell, but some of these plants are like 10, 11 feet tall. So that's great screening for the residents. But maybe you would like to look out and see your neighbors strolling by, so you don't want something so tall. On the right, we've got a much shorter rain garden, and that's in part because it's in a median. We can't have it too tall, but it also has a nice visual appeal. Some shorter species, again, we'll get into this more later on, but we've got some on the left here, Canada anemone and some iris. Those aren't going to get too tall, and they're going to kind of fill in and look like a nice ground cover. On the right, we've got some wild petunia, and it's just pretty to look at, and it's not going to obstruct any sight lines. One thing to consider if you live in the city of Madison, we do have some restrictions for plantings. You can plant kind of whatever you want in the interior of your terrace, but when you get close to the curb, nothing taller than 8 inches. You'll want to think about that, in your own yard, close to your driveway. Zone A on this little diagram here is showing where if you're backing out a car, you might want to have a little extra visuals so that you can see pedestrians, so you can see other cars coming. So if you have the ability to locate your rain garden so that it's not going to be blocking your driveway views, that's a good idea. I know one thing I noticed this winter, and you probably all noticed, is that tons and tons and tons of snow piles up next to your driveway as well. Maybe you don't want all that snow or salt if you use salt directly in your rain garden. I know my rain garden is actually fairly close to my driveway, and it does take a fair amount of snow, and it does just fine because I have a lot of really hardy native plants in there. But think about what species you're trying to propagate, and that could be a consideration for where you locate it. let's see. Vision hazards, of course, if you decide to plant a terrace rain garden, this rain garden is very overgrown. That tree there, that shrub is actually blocking the street sign. You can't even tell what street you're about to turn onto. So you really want to be careful where you're planting things if you have a corner lot or if you're planting on the terrace, so that you're not blocking anybody's view. We'll get into this more in the third class when we talk about plants. But something to just think about now as you're starting to lay out your garden is the design of your actual plants. So, what colors do you want? What colors do you want where? Thinking about the phenology, so when things bloom and how you can have color throughout the entire season, whether that's by, planting flowers, wildflowers that bloom throughout the season, or grasses that turn red or yellow and beautiful colors in the fall. Thinking about height arrangement, here's where it really comes into play. You want taller things in the middle, shorter towards the edges. That tends to work out pretty well with a lot of our plants because things that tend to grow taller take up a lot of water, and so they like wetter feet. Things that tend not to grow as tall don't like to have their feet quite so wet, so they would be on the edges anyway. But all things to consider as you're placing your rain garden. And then wildlife habitat. So about 30% of our native bees actually use hollow stems to lay their eggs in. So you really want to think about what you're planting, whether you're leaving plants. When you're thinking about doing cleanup in the fall, maybe you want to leave some of that litter so that insects can overwinter in it. You can do things to attract insects and birds, of course. You can leave dead wood, logs lying around. Again, that can help attract some of our cavity nesting insects. Of course, we always encourage you to plant native plants. If you're interested in adding structures to your yard, you could, set up a bird feeder, a bird bath. Here's a really nice insect pollinator house on the right. You could build something simple like that and just place it near your rain garden because you've got two sources right there. You've got your native flowers providing nectar and other sources of food, and then you're providing shelter for your insects with your house there.
Maybe we're almost out of time. I'm not sure if you can.
Perfect. This is my last slide.
Okay.
So yeah, if you design for wildlife, you just might be surprised who shows up. And we've got some nice butterflies and a couple of sandhill cranes that visited our rain garden. So yeah, and that's all I have for design.
Thanks, Maddie. We'll go right into the plants of the day with Emily, because I know we're at 7:30, and I understand if some of you have to go, we should be done hopefully in the next 10 minutes. I don't think Emily's going to take that long, and I just have to wrap up quick and give you an assignment too. Go ahead, Emily.
All right, can you guys see my screen?
We can see not really the present there. We
Awesome.
can now. Mm-hmm.
Great, so day 2 of plants of the day. We'll jump right in. So our first one is wild strawberry. This is our native strawberry here in this area. And this one's a really good example, just bouncing off of what Maddie was talking about. If you need to worry about things like vision hazards, because this is a ground cover and it's going to bring the height of your rain garden plants down quite a bit and provide some of that see-through quality. It's also a really good one because it blooms quite early. It starts blooming in April. So pollinators that are either coming back from the winter or coming out of the state they were in during winter are really going to value having those early sources of nectar. Our next plant of the day is a sedge species. So sedges are the name carex, and they're kind of a little bit like grasses. And brown fox sedge is probably one of the more common ones you'll see here in this area. And it's a really good one for the basins as it does quite well in standing water. It can tolerate quite a wide range of conditions. And you can see its flowering structure is kind of that cool green clump at the end, and that's going to ripen into a nice cool brown looking thing. So a nice tidy clump forming plant does very well in basins. Our next plant is a native grass called Virginia wild rye. This is a really good one if you have a shady rain garden because it does really well in those shadier conditions, although it can handle all conditions. It It is pretty short-lived, but it readily reseeds. People use it quite often as a cover crop. So if you're looking to fill your rain garden up quite quickly, you can use this one. And another cool thing about this plant is because it's short-lived, you can kind of manipulate your environment. So if you are seeing too much of this plant, you can cut off the seed heads before they ripen in fall. And on the flip side, if you want to see more Virginia wild rye in your rain garden, you can leave those seed heads over winter and let those seeds fall and germinate. Next, we have one of my favorite vibrant native plants, great blue lobelia. And this is also Teresa's plant, if she were a plant. So it's a perfect one for those basins. It gets about 2 feet tall, and it has a decently long blooming time from July through September. And it also attracts a lot of pollinators. And our last plant of the day is Rattlesnake Master, which is probably the coolest native plant name of all time. One thing I really like about this plant is its leaves resemble kind of yucca leaves. It seems like it would belong in the desert Southwest, but historically its leaves were actually used to weave materials out of. So it was actually discovered that there was some footwear that used Rattlesnake Master leaves to weave footwear out of. So it prefers full sun, and it can do well in, I've seen it grow kind of close to standing water up to drier areas. And it also provides winter interest. You can see that structure is quite unique, and if you leave it up over winter, you're gonna have something really cool that looks like that. So that's actually in Teresa's rain garden as well. All right, and I'll see you guys the last class. I'll leave you with a close-up of that Rattlesnake Master.
Thanks, Emily. All right, I'm just gonna wrap it up really quick and get you all out of here. Let me share my screen. So in the meantime, there were a lot of questions about soils and what different soil types are. There's a ton of abbreviations for different soil types, and Rick was able to put a link in the chat for those of you that are interested in the different soil types, and you can refer to that. I think the rest of the questions were answered on the chat as we're kind of running out of time here. I believe they were answered. Okay. Can you all see my screen now with the teaser I had before? Yes, okay. All right, oops, let me actually run the PowerPoint. So you've learned a lot of different things today, learned a lot about just design, construction, and Teresa kind of led us through, you know, a little bit more about design and sizing of our rain garden. So we're gonna try to kind of take that all and pull it together and create a basic plan. So we're not going to talk too much about plants yet, but again, what is it, flirting with plants a little bit, like Maddie likes to say. I like that. I'm going to incorporate that in my next presentation. So this is your assignment, and there's an actual worksheet in the Google Drive. Again, it just says, you know, class 2 assignments, assignment worksheet, and it'll list all the things that you need to do. Pretty much it'll include all these different things here, but in a worksheet format. And then it'll also include Teresa's little guidance on, you know, if you have this type of slope, how deep should your rain garden be, and you know, and the soil types, how deep and how large percentage wise should your rain garden be compared to your drainage area. So that's in the little worksheet that you'll find on the Google Drive. But this is my little, again, primitive plan. I took just grid paper and I actually put these on the Google Drive for you as well. So just if you don't have graph paper, it's grid paper or graph paper is really nice to use when you're trying to design your rain garden, just to kind of get the size right. So you can check that out in the Google Drive. It's in the folder. But the things that you should probably include on this are just the runoff area that's draining into the rain garden. So I just provided all this information down here. If you could provide all that information and then somehow incorporate it, you can write it onto your plan, whatever. But when you submit that on Padlet, that would be good information for us to have as we kind of review them. So that runoff area, and then the soil type, if you know, if not, again, don't worry too much about it. The slope, the shape, the basic shape of your rain garden, I went with the traditional bean. I like the bean. The size of your rain garden, the maximum depth that you want your rain garden to be based on kind of those calculations and that table that Teresa provided. How much sun you're getting, you know, are you in a very shady spot? Do you have partial sun, full sun? And then, you know, Rick talked about, you know, designing, making sure you have, I think everybody actually kind of covered this, but how are you going to get rain? How are you going to get your rainwater from your downspout to your rain garden? And then thinking about overflow. So just being cognizant of what's going to happen if that rain garden should overflow. Are you going to have a designated kind of outflow or overflow spot, or, you know, where is it gonna, what's gonna happen if that rain garden should overflow, and making sure that that water is going somewhere where it's not gonna cause too much damage or more problems than what are there right now. And then any kind of features that you might have that you want to incorporate. And Maddie kind of covered this, but do you want a border to your rain garden? Do you want some edging to your rain garden? Do you want that kind of neater manicured look? Do you want to include a berm or any kind of other features, boulders, you know, maybe some type of bench or whatever. And then just again, flirting with plants. If you can kind of think about 2 or 3 plants that you might want to include in your rain garden design, just to kind of get you thinking about the plants, and then include those in this initial kind of sizing and basic design here, just so we can kind of get a sense for what you're looking for there. And, you know, trying to keep in mind what Mandy was talking about, that you want things to bloom kind of all year long, or not all, yeah, all year long, at least during the growing season. And then, you know, do you want tall plants? Do you want short plants? So this is kind of what we're looking for assignment 2. And all the information again is on the Google Drive. And we're going to encourage you to post the assignments and any questions you may have, any additional questions that I think we covered most of them now, but any additional questions you can post on Padlet, or again, you can email us directly and we'll try to answer them that way. And for those of you that did not submit site plans, but if you're still interested in submitting site plans, just because we've moved on to class 2 doesn't mean you can't submit a site plan, you know, as part of class 1. So feel free to keep those coming. And then just a little teaser for class 3. So we're going to talk plants, plant recommendations, plants to avoid. We'll actually share with you some garden designs in the class 2 folder. There are some garden designs that I posted up there already. So some rain garden designs that you can just even take a look at. You know, you don't have to start from scratch. There's all kinds of designs out there that people have created, including Maddie and Emily. And you can kind of take a look at those if you're interested. And then we're going to cover maintenance and then move into our final rain garden plans. So that is all I have for today. Did any other questions come up in the chat while I was talking that we may want to address? I can't see my chat now because I'm presenting.
Amy had a question about guidance for sizing a rain garden built to accommodate flow from a sump pump. And I can answer that in writing too, but a couple of considerations. If there's a sump pump that's running regularly, it might mean that you've just got a really high groundwater table. And so if you're planning to put a rain garden anywhere near your home, that might be a problem. So I think certainly you can design something like that, but just want to make sure that you're not adding more water to that might be going into the sump pump. So if you got it far enough away, like 25 to 30 feet or more, it may not be as much of a problem, but still, you got high groundwater, and adding more water to that might not be a great idea.
Thanks, Rick. Any other questions before we leave today? Okay, well, we will kind of keep our eyes out on the Padlet and try to respond to any questions or provide feedback to any of the assignment second assignments that are posted. And if there's nothing else, we hope to see you in 2 weeks again on Tuesday, March 16th for our last class. Okay, last chance, everybody. Okay. Thank you. Have a good night, everyone.